crystals are arguably one of probably the more notable forms of nature's technology. And I have a video talking briefly about it, but I'm going to go more in depth in the series. I'm going to create a whole separate video on crystals. That's actually going to be the third video, technically. The third video after the human body. I'm going to do one on crystals. And what's fascinating is crystals are actually already being used in technology. Quartz is what is used for computer
They're in
chips.
like our phones, aren't they? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they're used for pretty much everything. So not only are they, kind of comprised to create the screens that we're looking at here, they're also in computer chips. They're created or they're kind of like refined into a sand. And that sand is used in computer chips as a conductor. They call it a semiconductor because crystals hold energy. They hold electricity, they hold power. And from what I've read when I've researched into Atlantis, because it's just a fascinating subject. One of the biggest pieces of technology that not only myself has perceived of, but Edgar Cayce, one of the great channelers of pretty much the contemporary era.
My favorite.
He's awesome. He's got some really great channelings about everything. I found a book on it was like this $1 book in a thrift store. It was Edgar Cayce. It was this thick book. Edgar Cayce on dreams, Edgar Cayce on health, Edgar Cayce on ESP. All of his channelings just in this book talking about all these different subjects. But I read his book on Atlantis and his channelings on Atlantis. And one of the things that he talks about in that book is the technology that they used and how essentially they were using crystalline technology to power their world. And there's a bunch of authors that speak on this, not just him. They talk about how the extent of crystal power can only be accessed by the human consciousness. Like the way that we're utilizing it right now through organic tech is actually kind of limiting to its true expression of power. The only way that crystalline power can be accessed is through our consciousness and through our will. And this kind of ties into the whole plant power and the technology that I'm working to bring about. And utilizing the divine connection of our ESP and our extrasensory perception to be able to access technology. We don't need chips. We don't need anything implanted in us to be able to commune with tech. It's like we were talking about in the last video, like we already have some degree of influence over our technology already with our minds. And I think that we can take it a step further to where we create a system of technology that's completely and totally reliant upon our consciousness. And that's exactly what the Atlanteans did. They created this system of technology that was highly advanced. And the reason that it was so highly advanced, unconceivable to our current perceptions today, is because they were utilizing nature, because they were working in harmony with nature. Their problem was that they started to get into eugenics and, they started to do all of these really bizarre tests on people, crossbreeding humans with animals, creating these really weird creatures that people call chimeras. And a lot of people actually say that a lot of the cryptids that exist now, like the werewolf and Bigfoot and all of that, all of those cryptids actually come from Atlantis. They were some of the species that were created during the period of Atlantis.
I've never thought about that, but
yeah,
I just believe in those things.
I do too. And what's funny is I'm writing a book series, a very short kind of like teen story series about a nature photographer who goes out and basically starts hunting for cryptids. So that'll be available over the course of the next 6 months. I'm going to start writing that series.
Great.
Yeah. And just essentially what those books will do is they'll kind of educate people on the various different cryptids that exist, like the Sasquatch. What are the different ones? That mermaids, like all kinds of different stuff. But ultimately, those creatures are really from the era of Atlantis, because they were conducting these very bizarre experiments on humans, and not even just on humans, on animals, on everything. They were just trying to play God. And if you look at all of these different periods of humanity, it seems to be that's kind of when nature almost calls it quits with a civilization, is once they start getting into eugenics. There's this theme that happens with every civilization that's fallen. It's like once they start tapping into eugenics, once they start trying to manipulate the human form, that's when society crashes. And that personally, to me, is what the Fermi paradox represents. You have this whole Fermi paradox of like, oh my gosh, like every civilization must come to an end at some point. There's all these different stages at which it could end. I think it has to do directly with eugenics. When a civilization starts trying to play God and starts trying to manipulate the genetics of the very perfect human form, because we're already perfect as is, when we start trying to manipulate those genetics, Mother Nature comes in and she just says, nope, and completely resets the civilization. And the unfortunate part about that is that we've lost this history. You know, there's a lot of people who don't even know Atlantis existed, or even worse, they ridicule it. They say that it doesn't exist. It never existed. Oh my gosh, how could have it existed? But that's really just what modern academia is telling us. Nobody actually knows. You know, none of us can actually say whether or not it existed. But there's all these pieces of clues and like these little evidences that have been trickled behind that once you have the eye to see, you start seeing it everywhere.
I see it everywhere. I see it in everything. Even like Laurasia, have you heard of Laurasia?
Yeah.
Where I think there's something to do with that in Appalachia, up above where I live. That the people that live up there, they used to grow and harvest ginseng and sold ginseng, and now you're the main supplier of ginseng is like what, China?
Yeah, China and Japan, I think.
And and now all that ginseng is off limits to these natives that have lived in that area forever, and it's all mainly in national parks. And
that's really interesting.
It's just a theory I have, but I believe it's being harvested and sold to China. And then now, I don't know.
No, I believe that. I believe that. There's also a lot of people that think a lot of the biblical events happened here in the Americas. Like that Mount Sinai was actually in the United States. The Mount Sinai that Moses went on, and I think it was Moses, that Moses went on and conjured up the 10 commandments, was here in the United States. There's a lot of people that think Jesus walked in the United States. And you know, it would make sense when you think about tectonic plate movement. The world did not look 2,000, 3,000 years ago the way it looks today.
Right.
I mean, and beyond, you know, the tectonic plates shift, continent shifts, poles shift as well. Like the axis of the earth actually shifts and flips.
A lot of people believe where I am right now is Egypt.
Well, what's funny is Atlanta, even like the name Atlanta is directly contrived out of Atlantis. And when you look at maps of Atlantis, it actually did comprise of the Americas, and it extended out into the Caribbean. It was a really big continent, and it extended out into the Caribbean. But whenever the different parts of the continent began to sink, we began to see what looks a lot more like the modern day expression of these continents. And a lot of people say that the Bahamas, the beaches of the Bahamas, are kind of like the last portions of the Atlantean continent to kind of stand. But we even see that within America. I think America was once part of Atlantis. And Edgar Cayce also says that too. He says a lot of people who are incarnated in America today are replaying the karma of Atlantis. And that's why in America you see a lot of greed, you see a lot of self-interested people, a lot of technological abuse, technocracy, all of that. It's a reflection and a manifestation of these past events of our ancestors. Because when you forget history, you're doomed to repeat it. You know, that's a really big issue, is that most people don't even know they're repeating this karma because they don't even know this history existed.
Like erased, you know?
Yes, it's been erased intentionally.
There's so many subjects we could talk about, like area, like the whole, you know, like just so end up it all.
There really is so much. I mean, and the crazy thing is all of this stuff connects. Like all of these subjects, these various avenues of spirituality, they come together and they connect in this really crazy but magnificent web of truth, that we can kind of link together all of these different branches of understanding of the world and come to this unified understanding of what it means to be a human, what it means to be on Earth. And it's
For me,
quite
resonates
beautiful.
so much more than like the Bible or, you know.
Yeah. And I mean, if anything, a Bible is just an extension of that. The Bible itself is just, it's arguably one of the most prolific books of magic ever written.
Yeah,
And
magic.
you could never tell a dogmatic Christian that, because they would get very upset hearing the
They
word
do.
magic and Bible
Yeah.
affiliated together. Those two words do not go together. But the Bible is a book of magic. It's really a book of spells. And it's really spells to kind of activate the human form and to help the human form become more connected with source. But ultimately, Christianity is tied into that magnificent web as well. Maybe not so much in its expression today, but ultimately, true esoterica is rooted in Christianity. I mean, Christianity itself is mystical. It's a mystical
Yeah.
science. In its original form, it was mystic. It was a mysticism, or sorry, it was a mystical art. They call it Christian mysticism.
Oh yeah.
And
The whole like going down, death and rebirth. I mean, resurrection. I mean, it's that whole thing is the same with every single thing here in nature.
absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. And what's kind of interesting is, like, modern day Christianity wasn't even brought about by Jesus. It was brought about by Peter, I believe. One of his disciples, I think, was the one who brought about more modern forms of Christianity. He kind of changed a lot of Jesus's principles. It was continued to be manipulated over the course of centuries, and then you had, the birth of the Roman Catholic Church, which further manipulated it. I mean, they completely took reincarnation out of the Bible. They took, all of these other truths and all of these other core principles that are pivotal for the soul's evolution, completely wipes it away. And it became more of a kind of like a control institution, as opposed to like an actual spiritual science that people could use to improve themselves. And all of this ultimately has been correlated and connected to, things like the burning of the Library of Alexandria and the decimation of our history. You have all of these people who have this amnesia. We're like a species with amnesia. We don't know where we came from. We have all of these, we have all these things that, like, academics have been telling us for a while, like, oh, we come from here and we're only 200,000 years old and whatever. But everybody deep down, I think, feels something different. I think we can all inherently feel that there's more than what we're being told. And that show just kind of gets into the idea of like a grand reset and like the great reset of civilization. And I think that we're going to see something like that. I think we're amongst a great reset. I think that's what's happening right now. I mean, I think even the tale of Noah just depicts the great reset, one of those expressions of the reset, because nature is alive. Like, she's aware, she knows what's going on the planet. And when we get to a certain point of spiritual disconnectivity, she completely resets the planet. And what happens is all of the people who are in tune with nature and are connected to themselves and are really embodying that Christ impulse, they are preserved so that they can further become the next generations to seed humanity in the future. And we see a lot of this being depicted with certain indigenous tribes, like Native American civilizations. We'll talk about how they came from a civilization that sunk beneath the waves. And not even just Native Americans, but people in Asia also are saying this. There's a culture in Europe, the Basques. The Basques are a very mysterious culture in Europe. Their language looks nothing like the surrounding languages. I think they're right above Spain. And this culture has been an enigma to modern archaeologists and people who study humanity and its evolution, because these people have no connection to the rest of Europe. Like, they're basically like, people are like, we don't know where they came from. But if you talk to the Basques and you look into their history, they actually talk about how they came from a continent called Atlantica that sunk beneath the waves. Wow. So you have this paralleled story reflecting itself all across the globe. And Edgar Cayce has a really great point that he makes in his book. And I wish I had my journal, because I have a whole notebook where I'm taking all these notes on Atlantis. Because I'm taking this seriously. Like, this is a research project for me. This isn't
Yeah.
just like fun, like a hobby. Like, I
There
genuinely
is
believe.
totally a reason why we got connected on Twitter. I mean, this is so just perfect timing.
I believe so too. I really believe so. And that's why I say, like, I truly believe that we're soul sisters. Like, I think this is almost like a reconnection. I don't even think this is the first time we're connecting.
Yeah.
And I know you feel it too. I know we both are
Uh-huh.
feeling this exchange of energy. But like, as I was saying, like in my notebook, I wrote down all of these different cities in South America that have almost the exact same name as cities in China. And I'll try to find the notebook and I'll bring it to our next session. So once we get into Atlantis, we can kind of talk about
Well,
it
they
in
got
more.
something to do with those portals you talk about.
Well, what's interesting is Atlantis actually utilized portal tech.
Mhm.
And some people think that's what the Bermuda Triangle is, because like I was saying earlier, the Bahamas and the US Virgin Islands, the British Virgin Islands, all of that was Atlantis at one point. So what's really interesting is you have all of these mysterious disappearances that happen in this area of the globe, the Bermuda Triangle. And I personally think this is why I've been magnetized to Miami. I didn't even realize it until after I moved here, because it was pure kind of coincidence that I came out here. Like, I wasn't really planning on leaving Texas. It just kind of happened. And it happened very shortly after I discovered this purpose of mine to really dive deep into Atlantis and to kind of bring it about into the masses awareness, like make it like a real thing that we actually study as opposed to like just mythology, you know. Um, I just thought it was kind of interesting. Miami is one of the tips of the Bermuda Triangle. And
Okay.
you see all of these like disappearances that happen and all of these crazy stories that happen, with the Bermuda Triangle. There's a lot of people that speculate that there's some sort of portal technology that is still active from Atlantis. And that's kind of where this interdimensional effect is coming from. It's coming from that technology that's still active. We can't see it. We don't know it's there. Maybe it's under the ocean. Maybe it's invisible to the human eye, but who knows? But what we do know is that there's something there. It's still active. We know that Atlanteans had portal technology. So who's to say that they didn't create something that could still, I mean, if nature withstands the test of time, who's to say nature's technology wouldn't be able to withstand the test of time? Because our current technology, we need humans to be able to power this stuff. You see like these apocalyptic TV shows where all the power goes out, because humans aren't around to keep up with it. With nature's technology, there is no human intervention. We don't need humans to come and intervene. It just powers itself. It continues its function. So I personally believe there's a lot of Atlantean tech that's still around, that's being utilized today that people don't even notice. And I think that's part of where the whole idea with the computer chip came from, and using quartz in, this inorganic technology. I think whoever was responsible for creating this, I don't know who created the computer chip, but whoever did must have known something, whether
Yeah.
it was conscious or unconscious. Maybe they were channeling something, but they had to have some sort of connection to Atlantis. And I think a lot of people in today's era do.